We're turning to GAA, so the Allianz League's kicked off over the weekend. We'll be joined by Tommy Welsh later on to chat hurling. Kerry beat Tyrone 11 points to 7. Galway beat Gavin by 2 points. On the Saturday night, Mayo had a 1-point win over Roscommon, 1-8 to 1-7 in terrible conditions, over 10,000 in Castlebar. There were 8,500 in Clonus to watch Monaghan beat Dublin 2-13 to 1-13. We'll talk about some of the aspects of that game in a moment. But first, Jim Gavin, I think, was in very given form by his usual standards post-match. He doesn't tend to opinionate much on matters beyond the match, but he was asked after talking initially about the game about the GAA and the rules, I suppose, specifically. And even though he's doing this in a very calm way and the tone is very measured, actually, when you hear his quotes here and think about what he's actually saying, it is withering, to say the least. So here's Jim Gavin after the game in Clonus.
I'm probably a little bit disappointed for our second league competition to be an experimental league, but it is what it is. But it's a great workout nonetheless.
Jimmy, on the hand pass rule that's not in place, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd no particular issue with it. First and foremost, I think it needs to be remarked that the and acknowledge the endeavours of the Rules Committee, the hard work that they put in, and the time and effort that they have volunteered their time to try and make the game better. If there was one thing you'd probably comment upon it, is that I think there hasn't been from them, or indeed our leadership of the GAA, a real clear vision of what they want Gaelic football to be. And I think until we understand what that is, we'll get this what's going on at the moment, lots of actions without a vision. That's a little bit of a nightmare. So from Dublin's perspective, I articulate my thoughts to the county board, and I don't believe managers should have a soapbox to comment on them, rightly or wrongly. It's up for our own local county boards to make representations on behalf of the county, not on behalf of the one particular team. So I'd no particular issue with it, and whatever our governing bodies say in terms of rules, we just got on with it.
What's your personal opinion on the game? The idea, as you say, there needs to be a vision of where it needs to go.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think the game needs changing?
No, I think I don't.
As in the rules, exactly.
Yeah, I don't believe so. But I'd always advocate anything that can, that can incentivise teams. So I think the black card is a really positive incentive for teams to attack. I think some of the plays there, outstanding one or two of the guys maybe taken down towards the end. But I mean, in general play, when players are going through in the goal, I think we would have seen in the past they would have been taken down, and obviously Monaghan would have experienced that in some of the championship games they played. So that doesn't happen anymore, and I think that can promote the game in terms of a very positive way. A bit like the sin bin. I would always advocate it.
I get the sense of you that you're not going to spend an awful lot of time in training working around these rules because they're not going to be in the championship.
We've 6 games left, and that's just the reality. If personally I would just gone out and introduced them, and so you have it. And when you go back to play with your clubs, you have it. And we've players playing Sigerson now on Wednesday. They have a completely different set of rules, and they're two completely different games. And the only thing I heard probably from the Rules Committee very early on, they were talking about trying to make the game a game of contest, and to me that's probably talking that it's trying to make the game a bit like hurling, and they're completely different games. One, you can accurately pass the ball 70 yards, you can half that in Gaelic football, so they're completely different games with different equipment that's used, and it's probably a wrong comparison, even though we both play both codes. I think that one might be influencing the other. So I think, to go back to my original point, I think until the GAA articulate their vision on what they want Gaelic football to be, then we can understand the reason why these changes come in. But to put a definite or a limitation on hand passes because there's too many hand passes in the game, that doesn't explain why teams are hand passing more than they probably did in the past. So until we get the why from them, I think there'll still be confusion and probably a bit of frustration from some quarters.
Jim Gavin speaking there in Clonus. Given his status in the game, it's a significant intervention, and doubly so when you consider how reluctant he is to intervene and give opinions and be, soapbox, he referenced there.
Yeah.
Given how reluctant he is to do that, it's a doubly significant intervention. No vision from the GAA. No, they've failed to articulate a vision for the game. It's a little bit of a nightmare. He's not happy that the secondary competition has been reduced to something of an experiment. He's not even going to bother implementing tactics to incorporate the mark, because frankly, what's the point? It's gone in 6 games. Sigerson matches are different. And even the too many hand passes, putting a limit on them. You sense that there was no subtlety in that. You know, it was such a... treating the symptom as opposed to the cause. You know, pack defences ultimately are the cause. And look, to a point, teams are more sophisticated. They're just not going to boot the ball away anyway, and that's a part of the game as well. But pack defences, maybe you could do something about. So he clearly thought limiting the hand passes, there was no subtlety in that change. And then, you know, he did thank the Rules Committee for their efforts, but he did reference the fact that they had talked about more contests and how that's a real nod to hurling. That's what makes hurling so great in some ways, those launched balls. And he said you just can't do that with these 2 games. So all in all, despite the very measured tone, it's like a devastatingly withering assessment of how football is being treated right now.
And I think it's all the more effective because now this is his 7th year in charge of Dublin. How many times has he come out and said anything as forceful as that? Like it's 3 or 4 times I can remember. He's made a few interventions over the years, but very, very rare. So I think it's quite, I don't know if calculate is the right word, but like he did pick his moment. Like when he was asked the questions, he had this in his head and he thought, I want to get this stuff out there. And he has that status now. Like you've seen, I think you probably noticed it the last few months. Brian Cody has been a lot more outspoken about the way clubs are being treated, what the direction GAA is going, than he has been about GAA matters for much of the last 20 years. And I think these guys, when they realise the status and the power and the weight that their words carry, I think they feel that they can be a force for positive change. And I think there is a lot of frustration out there, and there's a lot of misleading stuff. Like, you know, like Joe Brawley was bringing up a thing last night about how the mark was supposed to favour Kieran Donaghy type full forwards. You know, that was a stated aim, and Joanne Cantwell cut across him and said, you know, where was that? And I looked at it, there's no stated aim. That isn't a stated aim. The mark, you can catch the ball off your toes and it's still an attacking mark, you know, or on your chest. But people are putting their own stamp on what they want the rule to be. But you have to actually look at what are the actual rules that they're bringing in. And I wonder as well, like there was this perception that some of the rules were there to clip Dublin's wings a bit. So I wonder, is he possibly reacting to that a bit? Like some people did think, you know, the changes to kick-out rule, and you know, Dublin have very much gone for possession game the last 2 or 3 years. So like the hand pass rule would have scuppered that slightly. So maybe that got his hackles up a bit. But I thought he made a lot of sense, and there is a lot to be said that there is a lot of people out there asking what is the GAA's vision, and you saw that last week. And the word disconnect keeps being used, but there is substance to that disconnect. A lot of people do feel it.
Yeah. Regarding the game itself, I mean, Monaghan exemplified best of anyone over the weekend just how effective the mark can be, and it's not in the traditional Kieran Donaghy way. Yeah. I've had what a lot of people have described as the Andy Moran type run. Yeah. You know, and we all know that run where he's sprinting back and forth. I mean, those pop passes into chest there transform the value of possession in that moment, whereas before Andy Moran is facing the sideline back to goal and has 1 if not 2 people haranguing him. Now it's almost a certain point. Yeah. And like that, completely transformative. And Monaghan claimed 9 offensive marks yesterday. They scored 1-3 from the resulting play. It was very notable that Dublin only scored 1 point from their offensive marks. Now, of course, they have a possession-based game and they are wonderful exponents of keeping the ball with the hand pass, but they can kick a football too. Yeah. And based on Gavin's post-match comments there, yes, they're just off a cruise and they're only back 2 weeks, so they're probably dusting off the cobwebs a touch. But secondly, they've clearly put no emphasis on getting to grips with the mark, because what is the point? Yeah, well, that's like... you know, this is where you come back to your process and you're talking about taking each game as it comes or each competition as it comes, but this just makes it very clear that it's all about the championship for Dublin, that the league doesn't really matter, that it's all about the 5 in a row, because these rules can't come into this year's championship. Whereas Monaghan seemed, to me watching it on, Monaghan have put a fair bit amount of work into working the marks, and like that was the difference between the 2 teams yesterday, Monaghan's use of the marks. But Dublin...
rightly, I think Dublin is saying, what's the point? Like, we can't use these this year. Like, Monaghan might go through the league, and this is really effective. And then they go in against Cavan in Breffni Park, which is always a really tight game between them and Monaghan and Cavan. And they can't use those rules.
Well,
so you're going, what's the point?
Well, they'll hit these little pop passes in, and then they'll be swallowed up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everything Gavin said there, I think, makes total sense. It's
I
hard
thought
to
the
argue
attacking mark looked good yesterday, but I think they need to be taken quicker. Like, I think out the field, the mark has to be taken within 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that same stricture
15 seconds, I read, closer in to go.
15 is too much for me. I think it's just slowing it down a bit. I think 5 is enough, like, because 15, if you're 25 yards out, you're not going to miss. So just put a bit more pressure on the forward, I think.
Well, regardless, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how those comments are received, because it's fairly damning when the football manager with the highest status in the country, really the most successful at the moment, I guess Mickey Hart's the longest serving, but when he's saying there's been no vision articulated from GAA leadership about what kind of game they want.
Yeah.
And he's basically damning, their hand passes limit was the most basic thing they could have dreamt up. There's too many hand passes, let's limit them.
Yeah, and that's come in, like, that's been trialled at least twice before. Like, it's not very original. And there is this perception that they're reactive. They just react to what pundits rant about, and then they try and appease the pundits.
Yeah, and the notion that these players have to go and play Sigerson, completely different rules, is mad as well. On Diarmuid Connolly, by the way, he was asked about Connolly's potential return. He said, it's like any player who volunteers their time for playing inter-county football. Those choices that they make are purely those choices, and if players want to come back, we'll be delighted to have them. Pressed further on whether that was an indication Connolly didn't want to return to the inter-county scene, Gavin said, no, that's not what I said. So we're none the wiser, really.
No, and he was asked about Connolly after the All-Ireland final and at the Leinster Championship launch last year as well. And the answers he gave were similarly oblique. Like, he hasn't really given a straight answer on this. And like, from what I gather, it's quite unlikely that Diarmuid Connolly will be involved this year. And I think that's a huge gamble if that does turn out to be the case, because if you look at last year, they didn't need Diarmuid Connolly. Like, they won every game comfortably, bar the qualifier or the Super Ace game in Oma, which is still, they kept Tyrone at arm's length. Whereas if you look at the last really tight do-or-die championship battle they had was against Mayo in the 2070 final, and they needed him to win it. So you can read too much into last year. They didn't have that kind of challenge last year.
Yeah.
Maybe they won't have it this year, but I think 5 in a row always bring pressure. And I think they will. I think they might get a few of those challenges this year. Like, they went 4 points down with 20 minutes to go yesterday. He made a forward sub. He brought Conor McHugh on for Dean Rock. And Conor McHugh is a decent forward. He would get in most inter-county teams. He was under 21 player of the championship a few years ago. But if you were an opponent or the back that has to pick him up, you would far rather be marking Conor McHugh than Diarmuid Connolly. So that to me makes no sense. From a football point of view, Diarmuid Connolly should be there. So
you say a huge gamble. We don't know why he's not in the squad.
Yeah.
Is the point, and that's where we almost have to draw a line. For all we know, Jim Gavin's on the phone.
There was an interesting interview with Kieran McFall, I think, from Derry, I think, in the Irish News last week, and he played with Diarmuid Connolly in Boston last summer.
Yeah. But
he was talking about his preparations. He did yoga every single morning, and this is playing in the Boston Championship, which isn't, it's not elite level. But he says this guy was preparing very seriously and took his football very seriously. Yeah. So who knows? Like, it might be. People often go back to remember. I think it was the Mayo drawn game a couple of years ago, where there was a sideline kick that Kieran Kilkenny was about to take, and Connolly took it off him, and he missed. And it's often been read. People have read into that. Was that something that bugged Gavin? Like, that wasn't about thinking of the collective. It seemed to be grabbing a bit of glory.
God, this is some good January speculation, isn't it?
This is champion winter talk.
Just open rumour on the radio.